This odd glitch occurred when I was about 13 or close to. My family was moving into a new home. We were having trouble with a bookshelf that was a little too big, tall, and wide for the doorway. We eventually had to take it apart and bring it in piece by piece. The shelf went into my sister's room. She helped put it together. Here is the interesting part, as this glitch was experienced by my sister as well, only more so. She used the shelf for her books and stuffed animal collection. I left her as she was putting things onto the higher shelves, using a kitchen chair to reach that high. As soon as I stepped through the door, there was a loud crash. I'm thinking the shelf fell on Sis, or she lost her balance and fell, so I check. She is standing with her back against the wall and looks terrified. I peek further in, and there is no shelf. It was completely gone. Her things heaped on the floor in that spot. The chair somehow teleported back into the kitchen as well. My sis and I are the only ones that heard the crash. Not one other person in our family remembers ever having even had that bookshelf. This happened 5 years ago when I was 19 and living with my parents. We had a new neighbor who was super strange. She would watch us through her curtains and then quickly close them and run away, or she would stand outside smoking cigarettes and just stare at our house from her patio until we made eye contact, after which she would run inside. My parents started to leave for 1 to 2 weeks at a time to go check out houses 3 hours away since my dad got a promotion, and I would stay in our old house. I would still catch the neighbor staring at our house, but I was used to it by then. Oddly enough, I started to feel super uneasy at night, like I was being watched for whatever reason, but I figured it was just nerves from being alone. One night in particular, I felt extremely uncomfortable. I really felt like someone was watching me and I couldn't sleep. So I called my boyfriend at the time and asked him to come over. He said no because he didn't want to drive, so I went around the house and turned on a ton of lights and also barricaded any entrances and slept with a knife close by. I know that sounds extra, but I was scared. I did that for 2 more days until my parents came back. When my parents came home, I explained what happened, and they thought I was just being paranoid. My dad started on some yard work, but then came into my room with my mom and angrily asked me if I had started smoking. I was shocked and said of course I hadn't. My bedroom window looks out into our yard, and my dad said that right next to my window there were lipstick-covered cigarettes stuffed under the siding of the house. Obviously, we all had a pretty good guess of who it was, and my parents installed cameras. Our neighbor watched them to be put in, and she stayed away after that, besides staring through her curtains, and when we moved shortly afterwards, my parents picked out a house that gave us more privacy and installed the cameras on the new house, too. I still think it's super freaky, and I will never doubt my intuition like that again. I used to frequent a relatively popular 11.5-mile hiking trail. The lot that this trail is on is only about 50 acres or so the trail winds back and forth in order to fit. So one day I was hiking. This particular day was very nice, the weather was good, and I hadn't seen a lot of people. At one point, about 10 feet off my trail, I could see where I was going parallel to the same trail as it turned and snaked back about a mile ahead. I hope that makes sense. I noticed that, by that section of trail, there was a fallen tree with 3 people sitting on it, a man, a woman, and a boy. This by itself wouldn't have been unusual, as it is one of the most popular trails in this area. The problem was they were sitting completely still and completely silent. Their backs were to me, and they seemed to be staring straight ahead, almost as if they were entranced. I was very unsettled, as this is obviously unusual behavior. I kept walking, but being as unsettled by it as I was, I looked back and was startled to find that they were gone. I stopped in my tracks, listening but hearing nothing. I'll tell you why this startled me. Any outdoorsman will tell you that sound travels in the woods. Sound becomes entrapped by the canopy and funneled through the trees. If somebody steps 100 feet away, you're likely to hear it. And I, having been raised in the woods, have ears attuned to such sounds, yet those 3 people were able to move without me hearing a thing. I dismissed it. Maybe my mind was preoccupied and I just hadn't heard them. So I turned back around to keep walking. And ahead of me, on my section of trail, there they were, with their backs to me. I saw them silently walk away over a hill. I never saw them again. So now, not only had I failed to hear them, I'd failed to see them walk past me, and I don't know how. I immediately called up my friend, told him the children of the corn were out at swayback, and kept him on the phone so he could send help if he heard me get hit by a pitchfork or something. There's a possibility that I'm remembering details inaccurately, and what happened in reality might have been much less uncanny, but this experience bugs me to this day. My girlfriend told me to post this, so here I am. So I am a service plumber, and I spend a lot of time driving from call to call. On my way to my first call, an older man started waving at me like a crazy person, and I just nodded at him because I was just so confused and it was so quick. About 5 minutes later, I get a call from my dispatcher, and she's telling me that some man called in and told her that a guy in a cowboy hat was waving at him like crazy and that I made his day. I was so confused because I had not even waved at him, but maybe he thought I was waving? Who knows? I forget about it quickly and do my first call. When I am leaving the neighborhood, another older man waves at me like a crazy person, and at this point I'm starting to get very weirded out and call my dispatcher because I think that they're playing a prank on me. They are also confused, but we all laugh it off. I still get out of the truck and look around to see if there is anything on it or written on it that could be making people wave at me. Absolutely nothing. Then driving down an old country road, every single person I pass waves at me, which is pretty unusual for the town I live in. I get a few miles down the road and another old man sitting in a truck waves at me. I'm so weirded out by this, and my crippling anxiety made me see it as a sign of people telling me goodbye and that I was going to die today. I wasn't freaked out by the thought either, so I went home for lunch and had a great lunch with my girlfriend just in case I did die. None of what I'm saying now really pertains to the story, but I ended up having a really great day, almost what I would consider a perfect day. Just very confused with my morning and felt the need to share it. Just before Christmas, I went at a works night out at a restaurant with all my colleagues. I left about 11 p.m. after a good evening and got a cab. I had the cab drop me at a cash machine because I didn't have cash, but it was fine as the machine is only a 10-minute walk to my house and the restaurant is more than a 15-minute drive. I paid the driver and started walking. The quickest route to my house is through a bus depot, and obviously there's nobody out as it's late. As I walked through, I saw someone standing about in the depot about 40 to 50 feet away, but thought nothing of it. Maybe someone who worked there? I could see it was a man, and he had a gray hoodie on and some blue work trousers and combat boots. I carry on walking as I turn into the next street, and I begin to get this weird feeling. I shrug it off and keep walking. As I round the next corner, I happen to look left down the street I just came from, and there's the guy, still about 40 feet away, walking in my direction. Coincidence? I carry on walking. It becomes clear after 2 more turns he's following me. Either that, or it's a pretty big coincidence. I'm not easily rattled, but I'm beginning to plan ahead. What can I do? Where can I go that's safe? I'm still not positive he's following me. I test the theory by stopping and taking off my heels. A, it's easy for him to knock me over or chase me in them, and I stand a better chance of running and fighting barefoot, and B, if he loiters, as I do, he's definitely following me. I feel like my fears are quashed as he doesn't loiter. He walks past me and on as I pretend to struggle with my heel. I'm 2 minutes from my home and he's rounded a corner and vanished. Phew. My 2-minute walk home is uneventful. I get in, shut the door, drink some water, go upstairs to my bedroom that faces the street, and nearly fall over in shock. The bloke is standing across the street studying my house, intently staring at my front door and ground floor window. I freaked out and called my friend at the time, but before her and her boyfriend arrived, he vanished. It still creeps me out now. Last night, me and my fiancé heard knocking on our bedroom wall. We're in a townhome, so we assumed it was the next-door neighbor telling us to be quiet, and honestly, it probably was. But about an hour later, my fiancé texts me from the bed, I was in my office, asking if I heard that. I didn't hear anything because I was gaming and had my headset on, but nonetheless went to check things out to be safe. I assumed she just heard something in her sleep, remembering when the neighbor knocked on the wall. I went downstairs and looked through the peephole and saw nothing. Turned the light on, nothing. Looked out the back door, nothing. So I went back up and told her it was fine. About 30 minutes later, I felt a rumble underneath my feet. I went and asked her if she heard anything, and she said no, so I figured we were both freaking ourselves out. Ended up going to bed not thinking anything of it. Woke up this morning to a knock on my door. It was my next-door neighbors. They told me there was a white pickup truck backed up into my driveway to the garage, which is right below my previously mentioned office. The guy was sitting there, lights off, car running, no plates, looking up at my window. They went out to confront him, and he said he knew us, that we invited him over and weren't responding to his calls. They said he was wearing gloves and shaking a lot, like he was on drugs or something, but was insisting it was cold. They said he stayed out there for a long time. They eventually called the cops. Shortly before they showed up, the guy took off. It makes me real nervous that this guy was here. No idea who he was. I'm relatively new to the area and we don't know many people. The fact he could see my office light on and kept looking up at the window makes me quite uncomfortable. Like he must have known that we were home, and somehow that didn't matter. It could have been an attempted burglary, but I'm paranoid about the gloves thing. I fucking hate what my head is doing to me right now regarding all of this. When I write it out, it sounds ridiculous, but for fuck's sake. This happened years ago, and I have never shared the story because it took a long time to not feel fearful. I'll just jump right into it, and I apologize if I ramble. I worked at a place that had a hotel/banquet hall and restaurant. I was young and friendly to everyone. I was friends with some of my coworkers, while others was more of a passing hello. I worked most nights after school and weekends, so I was always there for special events such as Mother's Day brunch and holiday parties at the premises, and I'd dress accordingly. One Saturday morning, I come into work, and a concerned/panicked front office manager asks to speak with me. He starts questioning my interactions with his son, S., who worked in another department within the hotel. Now, his son was not someone I'd consider a friend, more of an acquaintance. I knew his name, and he was more of a friend of another coworker, T. And to be honest, S was a little awkward. I was still friendly, but I didn't interact with S beyond a greeting. Front office manager asks if I had plans to meet S the previous night. I say no. He then asks if I ever said anything about marrying S. I again say no, and now I'm really confused. Turns out S had mental issues that were made worse with drug use. I'm not sure if his parents knew the extent of it either, but the previous night they found out. S's dad told me in a panic that they found him in his room playing loud music under a blanket, rocking back and forth really late at night. Under the blanket he had a backpack with rope, knife, and drugs. His parents, obviously scared, asked what he was doing. He said that he was going to meet me that night and we're getting married. They tried to logically talk to him since my name hadn't ever been mentioned in their home until that point. When the logical approach didn't work, they were forced to call the police. S ended up in a mental institution for several months. Front office manager was pale and looked like he hadn't slept much. Needless to say, I was scared at how improbable and scary, in my eyes at least, this whole thing was. I had no idea. It caused a big commotion, and from that point forward, S was banned from the premises, and I was escorted to my car every night. I spoke to my friend T that day, and he tells me that this same night S was trying to convince him to come out of his house because he wanted to talk to him. When T didn't go out, he started yelling at him to stay away from me. T thought that was weird, but didn't think anything of it because, like I said, S was a little weird, but never violent. S had this backpack with him, too. S eventually got out of the mental institution, but I was never told. Unfortunately, I got a little lax and didn't notice that he followed me home one day. He waited until I was home alone and knocked on my door. I opened the door without looking through the peephole, and I froze. He asked to talk to me, and I couldn't think of a reason to give, but I knew I didn't want him inside my house. I went outside because in my panicked thinking I could outrun him or play nice so he'd leave. S tells me that he's much better and in school. Now, there is no way that he was in school because it was the summer. He was an older high school student, so his best bet was a GED. Then he rambled about what I wore to Mother's Day brunch 2 years prior. He asked if I still had the dress. He wanted to ask me to dinner, but I made up an excuse of working and talked about his dad, who still worked at the hotel. Thankfully, he left. The next time S came to my house, my brother came out and threatened him to never come around again. I saw him a few more times driving around my area, and I hid. I'm not sure what became of him, but I was terrified for a long time of being followed. It did not help that I had 2 other stalkers in my early 20s, but those are stories for a different time. I'll end with saying that it does not matter what you look like or what actions you took or didn't take. If someone fixates themselves on you, it is not your fault. I am considered attractive by most standards, but I really hate that I hid myself and became an introvert because I didn't want to be seen. I changed the way I dressed and avoided eye contact. I apologize for the length of this story. It's the most terrifying thing that I've ever experienced. This happened 4 years ago when my boyfriend and I were still sort of fresh into the relationship. My sister had recommended me a snorkeling trip for a fun thing to do with him. It was this quarry surrounded by a campground that is filled in with water, and it's known for its crystal clear water and its diving. There's apparently a helicopter and school bus that people dive down to see. My boyfriend and I decided to go camping for the night. While we were checking in, we separately both got a bad feeling about the place, but had kept it to ourselves until after we left. So at first it was a really good time. We snorkeled in the shallowish area of the quarry, and although the depth of the water was a bit uncanny, I still was enjoying myself. The water is 65 feet deep, so once you had swam out of the shallow area, it immediately dropped off, and it was pitch black. This is actually where I realized I'm terrified of water. Besides the dark, deep water while you were swimming, there's something very scary about a lake that is perfectly still. I assume because it's a quarry, the water doesn't have a current. My boyfriend and I are winding down our night, and we're back at our campsite. We are camping in a grassy patch down a hill from the road. Our tent is pitched in a wooded area that our campsite is extended to, and just across the green is a campsite that looks well lived in, but our neighbors were out. We're making hot dogs over the fire when our neighbors get back. It's nighttime now, and they immediately go to sleep. I'd say 20 to 30 minutes after they get back is when things started to become spooky. My boyfriend and I were chatting when we noticed a dark figure watching us from up the hill. Because of the shadow of the fire, we could not actually make out the characteristics of the figure, but we knew he was staring directly at us, almost hiding behind our neighbor's truck. He had watched us for what felt like forever until he started walking down the road again. We both watched him in dead silence, watching him walk behind trees, the same ones connected to our campsite, but that also went in between us and him. I anticipated each time I'd see him walk forward out from behind a tree. It was a good 4 or 5 he came out from. It wasn't until after this I noticed he had stopped walking, or was he behind the tree still? I was totally freaked out. Where did he go? I watched my boyfriend looking at what happened and thinking the same thing, but he had shrugged it off, and I naively do too. We actually ended up forgetting about it and went to the quarry late night. It was beautiful seeing the stars reflected against the water, but the deep, now all-black water was terrifying, to say the least. We walked back to our campsite, laid in our tent, and smoked a joint. I soon began to feel an uneasy feeling, which I was trying to ignore, telling myself it's because I was high. After some silence between us, my boyfriend says to me, "Do you feel like we're being watched?" I said, "Why would you say that?" half joking, but full serious that I was scared. My boyfriend wanted to get out from the tent, so we're standing by my car, and I got this stupid idea that being in the middle of the field, that's in the middle of the campground, is the safest place for us. My logic being if someone was going to come up at us, at least we'd be able to see them. So we're in the middle of this field when we see a similar-looking shadow figure from earlier staring at us. He must have been about 20 yards away. We both notice him while walking, and he's walking in the same direction as us. We change directions, and so does he. We tell one another if we change again, and he does too, that we're booking it to my car. When we change, he follows, and we book it to the car. I watched him from my seat as he slowly walked back into the darkness while still staring in our direction. My boyfriend at this point says to me, "Let's get out of here." I agree, but all our camping gear is outside. We quietly get our things together, not trying to freak the other one out. The weirdest part of this story, in my opinion, is the next part. My headlights weren't working, and there was a weird fog over my windshield that didn't go away no matter what we did. We had to drive out of the woods with only low beams and a strange fog over the window. We barely could see, but got out of there. Weirdly enough, the fog went away right as soon as we got to the gas station. We got home around 1 a.m. I told my father the story the next day, and he said he's glad we got out of there or else we could have gotten murdered. 2 people have died at this campground while snorkeling, which I found out after I got back. My boyfriend and I think it was either a person trying to kill us or a Wendigo. We've kind of settled on the Wendigo because what happened was so unexplainable to us. Thanks for reading. I, male, 26, just quit my job to stay home with my children while my wife works. She was tired of not working, and we have no babysitter. Today is the 2nd day I've been home with my children, 1 year old and 5 years old. We were eating lunch, and I heard a loud knock on my front door. Living in a rough neighborhood, I answer my door with a gun every time. I open the door and there's one guy on my porch. He's covered in tattoos, face, neck, hands, everything. I've tattoos myself, but something about his behavior and appearance together made me uncomfortable. He asks me if he can come in and use the restroom and use my cell phone. Of course, I say no because I don't know you, and he starts to get agitated and starts yelling, so I point my gun at him and tell him to fuck off as he walks off my porch. I'm watching him, and someone else comes walking out of the back of my driveway. I stepped outside and told them that if they come back, I will shoot them both. I don't know what they really wanted, but I refuse to allow anything to happen to my children. I understand murder is wrong, but I value the lives of my children more than anything else and will not hesitate to defend their lives with lethal force. So, to preface, I would like to state that this story is probably going to read like the plot of a campy 1980s horror movie and is going to be very long. However, this entire story is true. If not for being 5 miles from cell reception and the way the story ends, there would be a police report for verification. I will be changing names, locations, and some details in order to protect the privacy of the innocent. A buddy of mine and I try to camp twice a month now that I have a vehicle that can be trusted to get me to some of the more remote areas of our state. We planned a camping trip for this past weekend, 2/18 to 2/20. We chose a fairly remote location we had been to the previous weekend. The previous weekend, we were the only people we'd seen within 1 mile of our camp spot. Friday night, we got there and set up. This story takes place Saturday night. It's about 9 p.m., so the sun is long gone and the moon hasn't quite risen yet. It's pitch black out, other than what our fire lights up. Suddenly, we hear a man screaming. We listen intently, silently sharing an anxious look. At first, we were hoping it was someone drunk and having a little too much fun, but it quickly becomes obvious this isn't fun party screaming. It isn't even like he's hurt. It sounds full of despair, anger, and anguish. I'm going to take a moment to remind you that this is at 9 p.m., pitch black night in the middle of nowhere woods, 5 miles from the nearest cell phone signal. We hadn't seen anyone in hours. The screaming continues for what felt like hours, but was probably about 5 solid minutes. We had no idea what to make of it and started feeling extremely paranoid. We gathered up anything remotely close to a weapon and tried to come up with explanations of the screaming while keeping our eyes on the forest around us. After about 15 tense minutes of fear-induced paranoia, I nearly fell out of my seat as I watched a flashlight and lantern slowly enter our camp. I greeted the stranger with a basic, "How's it going?" before he was even lit up by the fire. He responded quickly but flatly by asking if we could do him a favor. "That depends on the favor," my buddy and I said in unison, obviously tense, holding our weapons close to us. The stranger proceeded to ask if he could hang out for a second by the fire. Given the 2 of us and 1 of him, plus our myriad weapons gathered from around camp to within our arm's reach, we decided to agree and let him hang out. After a short second of awkward silence, I ask him what the hell is going on. He proceeds to tell me and my buddy that he was camping down the trail with his buddy and that his buddy had snapped and tried to kill him. "Wait, what?" I said before the thought even finished processing in my head. "Is that the screaming we heard earlier?" The man slowly nods, staring blankly into the fire, and begins his story. "We were just hanging out, man. We came up earlier today, and my buddy just freaked out. He started screaming and just wouldn't stop. And then he attacked me. He lunged at me, and I told him to just back off and chill, you know? Well, he kept coming after me, and it started to get pretty violent, and I'm pretty sure he was going to kill me. So I grabbed my car keys, the lights, and ran. I don't know what to do, man. He chased me when I ran, and I don't know what to do. We don't have firearms or anything, but we do have a hatchet." My buddy and I looked at each other for a second, completely astonished. Then something horrible dawned on me. Wait, he chased you? Like he's on his way here, right now? The man just slowly nods in reply, and right on cue, like some terrible horror movie come to life, we hear screaming from maybe 30 to 40 feet from our camp down the main trail. I just want your fucking balance, Gary. I want your balance, Gary. Gary, where are you? Where? Gary! I'd never in my life heard a man scream like this. I've never heard anything like it in my life. It was a brutal, guttural scream that was shrill to the ears, yet deep in pitch. The sound of someone gone completely mad. And the way he said the stranger's name would switch erratically from long and sing-songy to short, guttural punches of sound. We killed our lights, became silent, and listened. By some miracle, the madman didn't notice our camp and continued walking down the trail, screaming the whole way. We ended up chatting with who we'll call Gary for hours, listening to the screaming getting further and further away. Come to find out, they had taken 4.5 to 5 grams of magic mushrooms each, and his buddy, who we'll call Ty, was a coworker of his and was fine for about 3.5 hours, then suddenly snapped. It seemed as though Ty thought he could kill Gary and steal his good trip. We hear the screams get further and further away for over 2 hours. By this time, it's 11 p.m., the moon is starting to come out, and it's below 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Ty had no jacket or flashlight, according to Gary. My buddy and I are way too drunk to drive out of camp to get cell service, as it was snowy and icy and required 2 to 3 miles of highway driving after getting off the trail. And Gary was still lightly feeling the effects of weed and mushrooms, so he couldn't drive either. We had to make the decision to let the guy wander, hope he sobered up and could find his way back. And he did. Oh, he did, right into our camp. We hear yelling after about an hour of no screams, maybe 30 to 50 feet from camp again. Hey, help! Please help me, I'm lost! And we can tell the man's walking from the woods into our camp. We tell Gary just to hide, just in case, and greet the man with me carrying my 12-gauge shotgun and my .40 caliber pistol holstered, my buddy carrying his AK-47 style rifle and his 2 9mm Glocks holstered, and with our flashlights on our brightest settings in his face. He was about 6'2 to 6'3, approximately 300 pounds. We talked to him, decided he was calm enough to walk with, and walked him back to his camp. He seemed really remorseful, said he blacked out and didn't remember anything, and had a falling out with his buddy. We escorted him back to his camp and down the trail, returned and told Gary that Ty seemed cool, and if anything else happened to scream and come running, we would come out and help him. It ended up being a happy ending. We made friends with Gary, and I got his phone number to make sure the next day he got back into town safely, back to his wife and kid, and we're actually planning a camping trip with him soon. But Ty, who wandered screaming like a deranged maniac into the forest, potentially wielding a hatchet to murder your friend and steal his good trip, or whatever it is your psychosis-filled mind was thinking, for the love of God, let's not meet again. Hello, little Vickies. Thanks so much for listening. I post every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday by 5 p.m. Pacific. If you like what you heard, please subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the like button and leave a comment if you want to say hello or have a suggestion. It's all very helpful to my growth here on YouTube. If you have a story of your own you'd like to share and possibly have read on the channel, send it to me at veronica45stories@gmail.com. Link is also in the description. Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it more than I can say. And until next time, be good.